You're hanging out in the House of Sunny podcast, where it's always sunny, mostly because of your host, comedian and YouTuber, Sunny Lohman. Want to know what Sunny and her friends are thinking about this week? Well, here she is, Sunny Lohman.
Hey everybody, welcome to the House of Sunny podcast. I feel like I should have an intro, Doug, like, you know, hello, it's the House of Sunny podcast.
Yeah, you're a little
where
bit...
it's always
sunny. A little
sunny.
more energy here, man. There you go.
Well, I feel like, everybody else has like a thing. They have a thing, and I'm not creative.
Your
I want to
thing
steal
is
other
no thing.
people's. Like, I want to, I want to start with like, all right.
Woo! Let's go.
I think that's from an old movie with Matthew McConaughey. All right.
Yeah, sounds like...
From our era. Anyway, or maybe even younger than us. That's how old
That
we
was
are.
the money one with the Tom Cruise.
No, it was before
where he's a
that. It was
sports agent?
like where he played a teenager. He played a guy who was like 19 and still hanging out with high school kids.
Oh, right. Awesome.
What a genius character. Because that guy
A great
exists.
yeah.
Remember that guy?
Hell yeah.
The guy who bought alcohol for all the kids?
I wanted to be that guy.
And then you got to that age and you realized, what a loser.
Yeah, maybe I don't want to be that guy.
He was like the coolest guy around. And then you realized, whoa, he was the biggest loser around.
Yeah, when I was like in 6th grade, this girl hung around us that was like in 8th or 9th grade. And we just thought she was like God. She was like a couple years older. And it wasn't until a little later I was like, why is a teenage girl hanging around with 6th grade boys?
Yeah.
Something's wrong
So
here.
that she
But
could
at the
be
time,
a
we
goddess.
thought she was...
She wanted to be worshipped. She's probably a famous movie star.
Doubt it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I had a couple of... so the show today, we're going to get into the censorship and what to do. I think it's a big struggle on our side that... we have these values. This side, our side, values free speech. We value freedom. We value rights. And because of that, it's like we can't fight back. And we have to just sort of accept what's happening to us on social media. And I think everyone's kind of scrounging for the legal argument. They're scrounging to fit that square peg into a round hole. And we're going to talk about the legal stuff. But we're going to talk about the morality of the situation. And I think we're trying to get to a place, Doug and I, where we feel like we know what to do. It's consistent with our values as freedom lovers. But it's not the pussy response of laying down and letting them do this to us, because it's obviously wrong.
Exactly.
And so, so we'll be talking about that. But first, I thought, you love my cat stories. So I wanted to give you a Nico update. He was out all night. Things happen when you're out all night.
Definitely.
And so Nico is white. He's white fuzzy with black spots. And he came back just reeking like a skunk. And his whole front of his body was yellow. I mean, he just got tagged hard by a skunk.
Sounds like me after some all-night
This is after you,
adventures.
That's right.
Coming back yellow.
Yellow and stinky, man.
And it's happened.
And so obviously he either tried to attack a skunk. I mean, he probably tried to attack a skunk, I'm assuming. That sounds like my cat, because he's a big cat and he's a really tough, like, he catches big animals. So he probably thought he could get this. He didn't know that skunks have a defense mechanism. And
How would he know?
He came back and he was foaming at the mouth. The smell was so bad, and it might have even gotten in his mouth. I mean, his mouth was just foaming.
Gross.
And we sort of banished him to the garage for a couple of days. We had a lot going on. We couldn't really deal with it. And he was lethargic and...
Wait, your cat came home smelling like a skunk, so you just put him in the garage for 2 days?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. Well, we made him comfortable out there. Yeah. He had a nice bed and
Oh my
food,
God.
and he could go in and out of the garage, you know.
Is there like a social services for pet owners? I'm calling them right now.
It's not a person, dude.
abuse.
It's a cat. Some cats live in barns. I mean, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
So he can't come in because he would get skunk over everything.
Right.
And
Well, that's why you got to clean them.
that does not come out, you know? So
Tomato juice.
well, that's what they say, but according to the internet, that's a myth. So I gave him a bath in peroxide and baking soda. And then I scrubbed him with dishwashing soap. That's what they said to do on the internet.
Wait,
So
you just said the internet. You don't trust the internet.
Well, you know, I go on and I take like a, what do you call it? It's sort of like a survey.
Yeah.
And then I see what most people seem to be doing.
All right.
So I did that. And then they said wash him, you know, with regular soap after that. So I did that. And that wasn't even enough. So I left him out another couple of days.
Oh.
And then I washed him again in the same formula because it wasn't fading. So I did it again. So then he was fine and I let him in and we were a happy family again. Well, yesterday he comes in reeking of skunk again. So now I have to do it again. So he was out in the garage last night.
Stop.
Yes.
It's time to put him down.
Dumb cat. I can't put him in the garage, but I can execute him for stupidity. Is that?
Wait, so you think he got sprayed again?
Yes, I do.
So he's in this some sort of either love affair or battle royale with a skunk?
Wondering if it was kind of a Pepe Le Pew situation, maybe.
Exactly.
Going on out there in the middle of the night. 2 in the morning in the Sonoma wilderness is pretty crazy.
You might have some cat skunks litter to take care of.
Yeah.
Little puppies.
Yeah, so that's my cat news. And okay, so we have a state of affairs here where everybody's getting banned and deplatformed, and it's social media and it's banking and it's web hosting. You know, it's WordPress has just canceled creeping Sharia because you're not allowed to say anything critical against Islam. MasterCard has PayPal and Stripe and like I said, ISPs, web hosting companies. They're all censoring the right, or really anybody they don't like. I mean, like you can include actual Nazis in this. And I think the Nazis are such a marginal group in the U.S., they ought to be able to speak as well. I don't really see a problem with that. So everybody's getting censored. Everybody who's not in line with the cult of leftism is getting censored. And a lot of people are, it's a really difficult subject because there's all this legal stuff involved. We've never really seen this kind of company before, this kind of business or this kind of colluding, I'm going to call it censorship. I think it's censorship. People don't like it when I use that word. I don't want to use that word and alienate people who are annoyed with that word because I really think that you guys need to pay attention. If you don't think it's censorship, still pay attention, okay?
There's a reason why I'll get into this in a second, but go ahead.
So all this is happening and we're all just like, what do we do? What do we do? And we're the nice guys. So we want to let people have their freedom. We want to let people have their property. We want people to associate with who they want to associate with. So we have a hard time saying, dude, you have to keep that profile on your platform because you can't discriminate against an ideology. We don't like that. We like to be able to we like to be able to speak out against an ideology. So why can't they ban why can't Facebook decide I don't like conservatives, I'm going to take them off the platform? And I think we have a really hard time taking the moral high ground here because it seems to conflict with our values. And so I conducted a little interview with Ed Mazlish, who I thought wrote a really good post on this, just regarding the moral issue. And I'm going to play that. And then when that's over, Doug and I are going to kind of discuss the issue. And we're going to talk about it, like what can really be done here. I think, Doug, you got some ideas about that. So
yeah, definitely.
We're going to get into that.
And I think Ed's fantastic at making the moral argument, which is underlying this. This is not primarily a legal argument. It's, we all want freedom. Our side wants freedom. And the basis of freedom is free speech and free thought. And if we lose free speech and free thought, we're done. And so
I think we all see this, but then it's like, how do we?
But the road to losing it, the road to losing free speech, first, you need to destroy the moral case for free speech. You need to make it, our founders, we had the moral high ground. Our founders had the moral high ground when they said it's moral for people to think freely. And we're losing that argument now. The left is making the case that free speech is immoral, that it's violent, that it's hateful, that it's hurtful. And that moral premise gets into the culture, and we're starting to see this manifest now in this sort of gray area between private business and government fascism, which we're going to talk about in a little bit.
It just goes to show
and then eventually it turns into a law, right? That we're going to actually lose it.
Right.
And so what we're pointing out now is
we all see that coming.
And so you first have to attack the morality and defend the morality of free speech. And I think that's part of what Ed wants to discuss.
So let's play that call now. This was pre-recorded yesterday, and I'm going to play that now, and then we'll talk about it.
Hello.
Hey, Ed. Thanks for joining me. So we're talking about the breakup of Facebook, or not the breakup, but the regulation, or all the censorship that the social media companies are doing, obviously against conservatives, and what conservatives need to do about it. You're a lawyer. And yet you made a wonderful moral argument against them the other day that I saw on Facebook that was interesting to me. And it's funny, as a lawyer, you should be able to talk about the legal aspects, and yet you're really, maybe that makes you more qualified to talk about the moral aspects of it. I don't know.
I don't know if that makes me more qualified, but I think that this is, I want to say, a unique situation, but it's becoming more and more common. And the reason I don't think a legal answer is the right answer is because the enemies of rights have figured out that if they work within the legal system, they can use voluntary means to destroy rights. And that's what's going on. And that's the real conundrum that we're facing. And we have a lot of people on our side, or who think that they're on our side, who are so horrified by the prospect of using law in an illegitimate way that they don't know what to do. They not only don't know what to do, but they say that we can't do anything to stop these people. And the reality is, if we don't do something, the end result is pretty clear to me. We're going to wind up with a dictatorship that's voluntarily voted in. I don't want to say just the same way that the Nazi dictatorship was voted in, but the way dictatorships have been voted in all across the globe.
That's clearly where we're headed. I mean, watching people get purged, which I think you can't use any other word than that. And purge was used. Purge was the word that was used when people were kicked out of university for not being the right party under communism. When the communists took over, they purged. Imagine you can't get an education because you're a conservative, or you're conservative, so your kids can't go to school in order to get ahead. I mean, that feels exactly like actually what's happening here. If you're a conservative, you can't get ahead on YouTube, Facebook. You can't be a publisher. You can't have a online magazine. You can't be a YouTube personality that's effective. The more effective you are, the faster you're going to get banned. So, yeah, I've been shadow banned on Facebook. I've been demonetized on YouTube. I'm still on there, but yeah, it's definitely, I would say, psychologically, it makes me like, well, what's the point? Like, as soon as I build an empire on YouTube and get a lot of subscribers, they're going to kick me off. And it has chilled my comedy because I don't feel comfortable anymore saying certain things where I used to feel like everybody understood it was a joke and people laughed, and now that's enough to get you kicked off. I see comedian after comedian get deplatformed. There's no doubt it's happening, but I think the question is, or the conundrum is, what do we do? It's not fair. It's not right. We're watching this happen, but the only people calling for a solution are like Elizabeth Warren calling for the it's like the left is the one calling for the regulation of Facebook. And I feel like it's a symptom of the same thing. They're just licking their chops. They can't wait to control the data more directly than they're doing now, which I think they are controlling it somewhat using political pressure.
Well, let me say a couple things. Yes, they are using political pressure to try and control, but I don't think they need to use political pressure, because I think the leaders and the owners of these social media companies are overwhelmingly ideologically left. So they don't really need the pressure to conform with Democrats and with the left. They're willing to negotiate and negotiate through what the Democrats want without any kind of formal nudge, just a wink and a nod. But yes, you're right that Elizabeth Warren and the left are itching to get control of the internet. But I disagree that they're the only ones asking for solutions or asking for action. I think that the people on the right are sort of divided. And the comment that you saw that I put on Facebook was in response to an article by Daniel Greenfield. And Daniel Greenfield is a member of the right, and he's calling for vigorous action. And the reason that I put my post up, and the reason that I rely on a moral position more than a legal position, is because, first and foremost, before we can act, we need the moral authority to act. And we have a lot of people on our side, especially in our objectivist community, that are trying to demoralize anyone who wants to take action, calling people who want to regulate Facebook evil, calling them statists, calling them collectivists, saying that we're just like the left, when we're not. We're defending ourselves against the left. And if we do nothing, there is no doubt in my mind that the left's end game is to import supporters of dictatorship, have as many people vote for dictatorship as they can get, control the educational system, and brainwash children into being adults who vote for dictatorship, and play the long game and have a dictatorship voluntarily voted in. They are not looking to do a coup, although, the whole Russia hoax thing maybe was a coup, but it doesn't look to me like it's going to be a coup by guns. It's a coup by slow rot. And if we don't take action, the whole edifice is going to collapse on us, and we need to do something. So when I wrote my post, my goal in that post and in many others is to provide moral support for the good guys, moral support for people to take action. And even before you take action, understand who the good guy is here and who the bad guy is here.
I think that is such an important point. Like we get all buried under legal stuff and is it right or is it wrong? It's like, let's remember who the good guys are. The good guys actually are the conservatives. Defending Alex Jones is defending free speech and the value of free speech. So I don't really give a shit, whether or not you like him or agree with him. But the people who are saying, dude, Alex Jones has a right to speak. So does Farrakhan, for that matter. And he was kicked off. But
here's the thing. Sorry to interrupt you, but I wouldn't spend a single word or a single ounce of energy defending Farrakhan's right to speak.
You don't need to. He was the token lefty kicked off. I mean, it was just a ruse to hide what was really happening, which was the deplatforming of a lot of conservatives. And there's no question in my mind that all the good guys are on the side of the people who are promoting the value of free speech. And they're all
Correct.
on the right.
Yes.
The bad guys are the other guys. It's not like they're going, oh, I don't like you, I don't want to associate with you. That's like, phone company deciding what I'm saying is they don't like conservatives. So why are they listening into my phone conversation in the first place? It's just a platform. I just bought the phone, it's not. So like Facebook isn't having to associate with me, right? I mean, it's kind of different.
Yes. And
I think I'm getting all
more
worked up in
fundamentally,
the details, but the point that you're making is, let me just recircle this. We have to remember that we're the good guys. No matter, we're actually the good guys.
Not just we, but I think it's important in each particular case to judge each particular case on an individual basis. Is Paul Joseph Watson spreading hate? Is he really calling for violence? Is Milo calling for violence? Or is the left's, is Facebook's decision to deplatform them a ruse? Is it just BS, an excuse where they cloak their immoral decision under the guise of legality and say, well, it's legal and it's all right, so we can do it. I'm in the comment that you liked and that you told me you wanted to talk about, I gave a couple of examples, and one of which was the drug war. And she said she never mentioned the need to legalize drugs.
Who's she?
Ayn Rand never mentioned, I'm sorry, I had to cough there. Ayn Rand never mentioned that drugs must be legalized without also qualifying that by saying drug use is immoral. I'd fight you to the death to not take drugs because it's going to blow your mind out. It's going to destroy your mind. And she even when she thought something should be legal, it didn't stop her from making a moral evaluation about whether the underlying conduct was good or bad. And what we're seeing today, especially from leaders of the Ayn Rand Institute, from Yaron Brook, from Amy Peikoff, from lots of self-proclaimed objectivist leaders.
Most of my audience is not objectivist, so...
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is really just fundamentally, this is a really difficult thing for conservatives. And we have libertarians, objectivists, and conservatives on both sides of this issue. And I think you're right. I think the people who are confused are the ones who, they just refuse to take a moral stand about this. The moral, in fact, they are taking a moral stance. They're saying the tech companies have every right to do this. That's the moral stand that they're taking. They have nothing to say about the deplatform people.
Correct, exactly, and that's my point exactly. If you can't evaluate the underlying conduct, if you can't evaluate, are these people who are being deplatformed good? Is Facebook's justification, is Twitter's justification legitimate, or is it just a lie that they're trying to hide their real motivation behind? And if you can't make that evaluation and you just mentally stop at they have the right to do it, well, eventually your mind is going to get to the point where they have the right. They are morally right to do it. And unless you find some countervailing right or some countervailing moral right, you're going to come out on the side of these social media companies are right. And if they are right, the next necessary step is no action should be taken against them.
Exactly.
So before any action can be taken against them, one person has to decide, or not one person, but a person has to decide what these companies are doing is wrong. They may have the right to do it, but it's wrong.
It is so wrong. And let's use your two examples. So you have the drug example is maybe you can defend the legalization of drugs because freedom is important, but it's still immoral to use them. And your other example is even better. The Nazis at one time, back before they tried to exterminate the Jews, they called for a boycott of Jewish businesses, which is a voluntary action. That's correct. Not force. There's no force involved in that call for a boycott.
Well, I mean, it was sort of this hybrid call for boycott that's akin to what's going on today. I mean, if Kamala Harris, as Daniel Greenfield writes in his article, if Kamala Harris is telling the tech companies that if you don't deplatform these people, you're going to get regulated. Well, if the tech companies turn around and then start taking action, is it voluntary action or are they acting based on the threat? It's unclear. I mean, it's just not clear. And with the Nazis, same thing. I mean, the first boycott was April 1st, I think, of 1933, about 6 weeks after Hitler took power. And you have the government saying, we don't think you should patronize these businesses. Now, there wasn't a law. It wasn't illegal to go into a Jewish business.
It was just rhetoric at that point, which, by the way, is exactly what it is right now. I mean, it's not just Kamala Harris. It's a lot of people, politicians, elected officials on the left calling for the deplatforming of conservatives and even mild conservatives. And then there are these evil, vicious groups like the SPLC that have made lists of mainstream moderate conservatives as being hate speech. You know, and hate speech is supposedly violence, so it has to be, in fact, they are clearly making an argument that it's violent, and therefore the government should step in and stop it. That's the argument they're actually making it.
The Southern Poverty Law Center has been doing that for a long time. And really what they're saying is, if you disagree with us, you're violent. And if you disagree with the left, you're violent.
You're violent.
And it's a completely dishonest evaluation.
And now, this is how they justify putting people in camps at the end of the day, you know? I mean, it's so clear. And in Russia and in Nazi Germany and anywhere, you know, it's not like you wake up one day you're free, and the next day you wake up and the government's knocking on your door and telling you.
Correct.
That's not how it happens. And these idiots are going to wake up one day to actual government censorship and go, no, gee, you know, how did that happen?
What happened exactly? And another thing that I put into my piece was that culture matters, and censorship doesn't happen overnight. A people and a culture that accepts the free and robust exchange of ideas is not going to tolerate censorship from the government. It just isn't. Regardless of what the ideas are, people who believe in a free speech, free exchange of ideas are not going to take it when the government says some things are not acceptable and some things are. In order for censorship to come, you need the people to be conditioned to accept that it's okay, it's morally right for people to be silenced. And that's exactly the argument Facebook is making, although they're not making it explicitly. That's the argument.
Now, some would say they're not really being silenced because you just go to another platform. You just go to another company.
Right. Just like, the Jews in Germany, you go to another, you get different customers. You just can't get Germans. You can't get Nazis.
Go live in a ghetto because where you don't have to intermix with Germans.
Right. And see, that's where legally, looking just for purely legal solutions is going to be inadequate, because ultimately we're dealing with an enemy that has infiltrated us and has infiltrated our legal system and has figured out that if we work through the legal system, we can destroy the system of rights through legal measures. And honestly, I hate always, analogizing to the Nazis, but that's exactly the decision Hitler made after his beer hall putsch and his stint in prison in 1923-24. He said, okay, well, we're going to take over through legal means. And they did exactly, they did a whole bunch of things that were illegal.
It's funny, though, because we don't live in a free society. So when they want to, they use freedom and they say, oh, the tech companies have the right. When they don't want to, they use things like antitrust or whatever, and they threaten Facebook and say, we'll break you up unless you do our bidding. And Facebook knows.
Who's the they that you're talking about there?
The left, the left will use the laws that are not so free in our mixed economy to crush these tech companies, and that is the threat that they're holding over their head. Facebook knows that the conservatives aren't going to use antitrust because it's kind of against our values. Although some are calling for that.
I would say the better example to use would be the baker and the cake. Right? The baker who says, I have a First Amendment right to decide I don't support gay marriage and I don't support gay weddings, that guy is forced to bake a cake because the left says you're going to do what we tell you to do. And his First Amendment rights don't matter. But the people who are on the left, who are doing the left spinning, they have the right to do whatever they want. It's a free market.
But I guess what I'm saying is they're happy to use legal means, whatever they are, whether they're freedom, real, actual, legitimate law, or bad law that's anti-freedom. Correct. They'll use those laws too. I mean, they'll do anything. They're absolutely unscrupulous.
That's what I was saying. That's what I've been saying throughout this conversation.
Yeah.
They have figured out that they can get away with destroying rights as long as they act through legal channels.
Right.
And if we don't recognize the threat that poses, we're not going to take action.
So
and the
how
legal
do you
system.
Beat that?
Well, first you have to get people to recognize the threat.
Yeah.
And until you recognize the threat, no action is going to be taken. You listen to certain people on the right who say, "Hey, these are private companies. There's nothing we can do." If there's nothing we can do, then that's just you're demoralizing anyone from acting.
Yes.
So the first thing that needs to be done is those people, I don't want to say they need to be silenced, but they need to be intellectually defeated.
Yes.
We need to make the case that what's happening is going to lead to dictatorship.
Right.
And
that is such a good point, Ed. Yeah, what's happening will lead to dictatorship, and that's the case that needs to be made. We need to intellectually defeat. Our opposition is really these people on the right who won't lend moral support to the people being banned, and we're not united. We're all over the place in how we're going to deal with this. We can't even agree that it's wrong.
Correct. And once we agree that it's wrong, then there's a whole bunch of options that we can take. The left went against the baker on civil rights laws, right? They said you're a public business, you're open to the public, you got to serve everyone. Well, Facebook's a public business, they're open to the public, they should have to serve everyone too.
We're not a protected class, That's
I don't think that homosexuals, gay marriage, homosexuals are not a protected class.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're also not a protected class.
The protected class is race. We have a unique part of our history that involves slavery, and discrimination on the basis of race is a problem. And we can debate and argue about how big of a problem it is today and whether civil rights laws need to be strengthened or need to be backed off. But that's a whole separate issue. As a society, for everyone other than blacks in our country, they're not dealing with the after effects of slavery, regardless of whether it being 150 years later. There's no slavery that involves the left. So there's no slavery that involves the right. There's for any other group. So I don't know if civil rights laws should even apply there. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. But the point is, the left is using them.
We're not even in the legal argument, is what you're saying.
Right.
We need to make the moral case. We need to defeat intellectually the people who are out there just saying, "Oh, it's a private company," while we're all being led to the slaughter.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, and what I was saying, I didn't want to get hung up on civil rights violations as a possibility. That's just one possibility.
Right.
Greenfield argues for antitrust. I don't personally see how you can break up Facebook. It's not like it's
Does he argue for antitrust? I think he
did. He talked about breaking it up.
No, I think he argues for like an internet bill of rights, which I've seen other people argue for, where the government would pass a law that says, basically, that makes the internet a public utility, that not to be regulated, but to be, he's actually against regulation because he worries about that falling into the hands of the statists.
Right.
And so he just thinks the freedom to speak your conscience on these supposedly neutral platforms needs to be protected with some sort of law.
I'm not opposed to that, but
he used an example that I really liked that I feel like defeats, libertarians are people who are for a lot of freedom. And I'm a limited government person. I'm not an anarchist. So, but I do kind of think maybe roads should be private, but you can imagine a scenario where, and I believe this happened in our legal history, where, a guy owns an entire town and he owns all the roads. Can he just decide to keep you in your house because he doesn't like you? You can't leave your own property because you're surrounded by his property. I don't think that would be right. I don't think that we could allow that in a limited government society.
Right. I mean, those aren't the exact facts of Marsh versus Alabama, but Marsh versus Alabama,
no, that
which
was
is
like
a
a town
case
square thing or something like that. But Greenfield's example is if a private company took control of all the roads and then closed them to one political side on election day, would those elections be fair, or would those elections and the resulting government be a mockery of freedom and be actually a legitimate tyranny? And the answer is pretty clear. It'd be a tyranny. So
I think so too.
I mean, all right. Well, thanks for joining us, Ed, and thanks for making the moral case for
You're
standing
welcome. It's
up
always a pleasure.
on the side of
it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Sonny.
Of the deplatformed. All right.
All right. Take care.
So that was an excellent interview, and I think Ed made absolutely, both you guys made the point that underlying this, the underlying behavior of the tech companies is what we first need to address, and which he addressed, which is they're wrong. They're bad. They're the bad guys. They're trying to suppress conservative speech or right-wing speech, or basically anyone that disagrees with them. And they're doing this under the idea that anyone who disagrees with them is not just wrong, that needs to be debated. Anyone that disagrees with them is violent, is hurtful. And they're making this case, in one case, remember this, Sonny, we talked about this last year, they're making the case physiologically, that if you disagree with someone, the stress of disagreeing with someone is actually a physical. So they're really on this
well, they've got
game.
like Alex Jones with his Sandy Hook conspiracy theory. So freaking what?
Yeah,
that's what I think about it. I don't really care that he said something so dumb. And you're a parent. I mean, goddamn, I feel empathy for those parents. I mean, I have a kindergartner, I can't even imagine the pain and loss. But you don't then get to dictate other people's stupidity. You just
That's
don't.
right. That's right. And where I wanted to pick it up, since he made this case so well, is really the question of, well, then what do we do?
Right.
What does our side actually do? And I think our side's concern is well-founded. We don't want to defeat Facebook and these tech giants at the cost of giving Elizabeth Warren control of the internet.
Exactly.
And so we don't want to just haphazardly start flailing at, and attacking these people, not knowing what we're going to put in its place. And, the danger is always that you defeat one enemy and you lose you win the battle, lose the war. And so what I want to do is talk about the types of actions that I consider to be consistent with our long-term goal of having a free society, and yet still is consistent with the moral case against censorship, and that still fights back and shows these people we're not going to go down without a fight.
Yeah. I want to mention here that just to play on your point here, you said these are the bad guys. They're bad because, first of all, they don't support free speech. So let's be real. Like our enemy, I guess, the left, they're bad because they don't believe in freedom. They want to control. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg wants a universal basic income. He wants full distribution of wealth. He has said that he thinks Facebook should be regulated. Like he's for the regulation of his own company. So he's not on your side. He's not a freedom lover. And there was just as proof of that, there was a story recently where he met with Macron, and this is his own statement about that meeting, and I'm just going to read it. This is from Mark Zuckerberg, and he posts a picture of him talking to Macron. I just met with President Emmanuel Macron in Paris to discuss new rules and regulations for the internet. We both believe governments should take a more active role around important issues like balancing expression and safety. Right?
Okay.
You need to take a more active role around important issues. Like he doesn't come out and just say, we need to stop certain people from talking. Like that, look how slimy that statement is.
Exactly.
Governments should take a more active role around important issues like balancing expression and safety, privacy and data portability, and preventing election interference. And by the way, the election interference is just people being able to speak freely and share information and therefore vote for somebody they don't like.
Exactly.
And then he has the fucking balls to call that reflecting their own traditions of free speech. The French don't have free speech.
Right.
They never have. Last year, we invited French government officials to look at how we manage harmful content on our platforms. Harmful content, Doug, there's your point.
What's harmful?
It's harmful.
What's harmful?
Free speech is
Define
harmful. Our systems now proactively identify 65% of the hate speech we take down before it's even reported, up from 24% a year ago. So their AI now takes down harmful speech, hate speech as they define it, which is conservatives. It's not Islam. It's not people beheading people. It's people like Paul Joseph Watson.
Mm-hmm.
But there are nuanced decisions to make here, such as how we should handle content that isn't illegal but might cause harm. This is an area where I believe companies should not make these decisions by themselves. There should be a public process with democratically elected governments. Today, the French government shared their recommendations for a new model that sets guidelines around what's considered harmful. Okay, so the French government wants to say, this is what we think is hate speech, and it's political speech that we don't like.
Yeah.
This would create this is back to him. This would create a more consistent approach across the industry and ensure companies are held accountable for enforcing our standards against this content. Other companies, okay, not just Facebook. This would create a more consistent approach across the industry to ensure companies are held accountable for enforcing our standards against this content. So he wants to develop the standards with Macron and then apply those across the board in his industry. Okay? This is not a good guy.
No. This is a guy that wants to submit to a government tribunal that
and
determines
be a part of
what's...
it. He thinks I get to be a part of it. I get to be a part of what happens. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to impose that with my friends, my buddies. I mean, he's like a Wesley fucking Mouch.
Yeah.
From Atlas Shrugged.
Absolutely.
I need wider powers.
He's like Emperor Palpatine.
Oh, he's so
We have
gross.
a crisis.
I think he's worse. He strikes me as like a more of a Jar Jar Binks type of person.
Not that bad. Come on. Let's not insult Jar Jar.
He seems a little bit of like a dope, you know, kind of like, oh, if I just make friends with these guys and they like me, then they'll protect me and then I'll get to make the decisions and I just need to be buddies with them.
Yeah, the picture of him groveling to Macron in that article that I saw was great. He's kind of got his head nerdily twisted like, oh, I'm talking to the leader of France. Ooh,
yeah. He thinks this picture makes him look cool. He's got a smile. His hands are out. His neck is twisted back talking to Macron. And Macron has his hand in his pocket. And the look on his face is, heh, 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 schmuck.
Yeah, exactly. And kudos to the White House, by the way, by rejecting this whole idea because they're trying to get the White House to sign on to this sort of like global elitist petition, you know, that we're all going to work together.
Global government in concert with business, Silicon Valley, regulations about what can and cannot be said across the industry on all social media platforms. So he's talking about Gab there. He's talking about Minds. He's talking about BitChute. He's not talking about himself.
Yeah, everybody.
Everybody. That is a bad fucker. So that's why he's bad. That's why what they're and who they're taking down are the people who are just speaking out against things that are uncomfortable, like Islamic immigration. And I don't know, just this whole PC nonsense. Anything they don't like. There's like a list of un-PC things. And anybody who goes against that list is in the category of harmful speech.
Well, the first thing, you know, that strikes me about this is we have to militantly battle against these premises that are being hidden and snuck in here, the ones that you just read. You know, what is harmful content? Who defines what hate speech is? Since when do we submit to global governance instead of our First Amendment? What does all this stuff mean? What is harmful? How do you define that? And these types of premises are always snuck in by the left when they talk about this, and it's somewhat Orwellian. It's very Orwellian.
Yeah, you have to read between the lines.
You have to read between the lines because we all know what this means, but they won't say it. And
yeah, imagine the paragraph said, "Hey, I was just talking to Macron about developing standards for what is and isn't appropriate speech, and then we're going to apply that across the global industry of social media."
One
can't
area,
wait, dude. Can't wait.
Specific, legal issue that I wanted to bring up here with respect to some part of what's driving this, and this will kind of get into the more general conversation of what we do about this. But
before we just get into the legal, I just want to let's you and I emphasize. So, are we all in agreement that this is bad, everybody? Right? That's what Ed said. That is the starting point. The people on the right need to agree that they are bad. What they're doing is bad.
And they're under attack. And the right is under attack.
And the right is under attack.
These people are trying to take over the world. They're trying to take over the government. They're trying to get us to a point where, not a coup, but at some point where we willingly vote these people into power, and we effectively fall under their rules of what constitutes harmful speech, which of course is anything that we believe in.
This is exactly what happened in Germany. I mean, it was a voluntary government that did that to everybody.
Whether you vote in a dictatorship or the dictatorship comes in with tanks and guns, doesn't really matter. The end result is that you're not free and you lose your freedom.
Right. So like you said, to your point before we played Ed's segment, the goal is freedom. And if the goal is freedom, then what do we do? And I think that's okay. The goal is freedom. We have this attacker, these people who want to stop freedom, and they're getting away with it.
Right. And
so what do we do?
Well, I think there's a bunch of fronts you can fight this on. First of all, just simply understanding, as Ed said, understanding and not accepting and challenging these premises whenever you hear them, this idea of hate speech, of harmful content or whatever. The answer is no. Free speech, absolutely. That we have that we're militant free speech advocates, and that we stop falling for this nonsense or acquiescing in any way to those definitions or their terminology. Secondly, in this context, the battle is tactical. So when you look at what we can do and how we can fight back, you don't say, we don't want to, win a battle and lose the war, as I said before. You don't want to, for example, I don't think antitrust law is the right way to go. And I think there's a couple of other paths that are better, because antitrust, to the extent that you advocate for antitrust laws, I think the long run consequences of that might actually be more damaging. So you want to look at the long run. You want to look at our goal and say, in the end, what do we want? We want a free society. Now, if things are so critical that all we have to do is defeat these people any way we want, and we along the way are still advocating freedom, we have the right to pretty much use any tactic we want to defeat them. And, first of all, everyone needs to understand the basis of the modern internet is the Section 230 of this Communications Decency Act, which was in the 90s, where the reason why Facebook and Google and YouTube and all these companies exist is that they got a immunity shield by way of this Section 230, which pretty much said, hey guys, as long as you're a neutral platform, no one can sue you. And this goes back to case law, actually originating in the 50s and then the 90s with Prodigy. But the idea was, if, for example, if you own a bookstore and, there's something in a book that defames someone, can you sue the bookstore owner for having one of 10,000 books in his store? No, you shouldn't, it's not up to the owner of the bookstore necessarily to read every single book he has, right? And so the idea is, we can't have an internet, or we can't have these neutral platforms if everybody's suing everybody. And so the government said, okay, we're going to give you a shield of immunity as long as you remain neutral. So you don't police content.
People
other
are
than
responsible for their own speech.
They're responsible. The content, the Facebooks of the world aren't responsible for what other people are saying. You're immune from these lawsuits. And that enabled these companies to form in the way that they formed. I mean, we know what a publisher is. A publisher like Fox News or the New York Times or CNN or whatever, they are publishers, and they are subject to be sued for libel, defamation. If they get a story wrong and they damage someone, they can be sued and be put out of business very easily. So they have to be very careful as journalists about what they report.
Yeah, they seem real careful.
And consequently, their business, yeah, right, exactly. Consequently, their business models are more limited. I mean, they, because they're not just accepting anything. Now, Facebook and Google, all these guys, they put up everything, and that's why we loved YouTube. That's why we loved Facebook back in the day, and Instagram and some of these other platforms, and Twitter, because you could, everyone could say everything. Everyone was there. It's sort of like it's a quote unquote neutral platform.
Right.
And ironically, it's the left, and I think Daniel Greenfield made this point, Sonny, in the article you guys referenced, that, and this has been happening over the last few years, when Hillary lost this election and they made up this Russian hoax nonsense, and they started, the left, Nancy Pelosi, Ron Wyden, Kamala Harris, and these types started saying, hey, Facebook and Google, you guys allowed this to happen. You are letting hateful, harmful, violent content sway these elections.
You let the Russians advertise
in.
on your platforms.
Yes. How dare
with $100,000 in ads that wouldn't convince anybody of anything.
And now we have Trump. So now, guess what? We are going to threaten your 230 exemption from liability. And so they're the ones who really started this idea of threatening these companies with rescinding the immunity, and therefore pressuring them into deplatforming conservatives. Because, how do you make Pelosi and Wyden and all these people happy? Well, you deplatform the right, not the left. And it's also, as Ed said, it's also consistent with their own ideology, because they're all leftists. So that's a real happy marriage. Oh, you're threatening us if we don't deplatform conservatives? Okay, we'll deplatform conservatives and everybody wins. So a lot of this pressure, and again, the people that make this, blithely make this, they're a private company argument. That's total bullshit. We do not have a free market. These companies are being threatened by the government in a fascistic manner to crack down on conservatives. And similarly under the...
Just to expand on that, it's not just one politician. I mean, I think I've seen a dozen make public threats on Twitter, like written down, against either Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, just in general, about how they better watch out. Dianne Feinstein has made threats.
Well, let me quote Nancy Pelosi.
Okay.
She was speaking about Section 230. Pelosi said, "It is a gift to them. And I don't think that they are treating it with the respect that they should." Ooh. And so I think that could be a question mark and in jeopardy. I do think that for the privilege of 230, there has to be a bigger sense of responsibility on it. Ooh. And it is not out of the question that could be removed.
Yeah. And what's funny is that what they're saying is, hey, neutral platforms that have exemption from liability because you promised to be neutral, we want you to be less neutral, or we're gonna take away your liability exemption. But so it's like they're turning them into publishers.
Yes.
So it's now a publisher that's exempt from liability laws.
But the irony and the twisted nature of this is that the ruse is that by banning conservatives, they're conforming with their neutrality. In their twisted minds, they're saying, unless you ban Alex Jones, you're not neutral.
That's freaking crazy. I haven't heard anybody say that. Is that, you really think they think that?
Well, of course, that's what they're saying. I mean, that's what they're saying, that by allowing extremist content, hateful content, that's what's jeopardizing them, and that's somehow not neutral. So, I mean, Nancy Pelosi's not saying
I mean,
hey,
I think what they're
let
really
everybody
saying
speak,
is
guys.
watch out, because we have these regulation mechanisms and legal mechanisms where we can crush you like a bug. So you better ban conservatives or we'll use them. I mean, I don't think anybody's thinks seriously that banning conservatives achieves a neutral platform. It might achieve what they consider to be a safe and inclusive platform, but I don't think they think it's neutral. I don't know. Maybe they do.
Well, it's funny because both sides are using 230 because on the right, we're
Yeah,
also
that is
saying,
funny.
hey.
Well, because they're
hey,
turning into a publisher.
They are. They're absolutely
So
turning into
now
a
they
publisher.
really do legally not fall under the category of neutral. And so, all right, then you should be subject to liability laws.
But and my point, though, is that for the Congress to act, that of course, as long as they're banning conservatives, Pelosi and her clan are not going to act to rescind 230. You know what I mean? It's not like it's not like they really care about neutrality. The left just wants them to ban conservatives. So as long as they make them happy, the Congress won't act. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's fascistic. As long as they do the government's bidding or whoever's in power's bidding.
And I remember reading, there was a great article in Wired magazine about what I'd like to call big media, fucking boss hog, fat cat, big media, putting pressure on him and others but specifically in this article, Zuckerberg, because the new media was basically taking all their business. And how they were putting, and it just basically listed all of the pressure that Facebook was getting because of this via government. The big media was using their government connections and making threats, of its own. And shortly after that, that's when Zuckerberg took off trending news or rejiggered it so that it would be, it was not real trending. It was like whatever Facebook decided was trending.
Yeah. Well, we want to trend.
And YouTube does that too, where you can clearly see this bias. If somebody has a video on a subject and it has 3 million views, and you put in the search for that subject, you'll get CNN, MSNBC, New York Times. You'll get like the mainstream media on that subject, even if they only have like 10,000 views on their video.
Yeah.
And so the little guy, the YouTuber, the quintessential YouTuber who's got 3 million views on his news story about that isn't even featured. It's not even on the first page of search because they're algorithmically favoring the big media companies and trying to help them from dying.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's going on. So, it's partly a power play of crony capitalists.
So
it's not just we want to take control of the internet and control speech, which I think they do. I think it fits quite nicely with the goal of old crony media. And they are cronies. They're all leftists, 90% Democrats or something like that. You think those people are good people who believe in socialism and believe in that sort of thing? You think they're just like appreciating the free market behind the scenes?
Right. And
they gave questions to Hillary in a debate before the debate.
Yeah, Donna Brazil did.
I mean, there's
CNN.
evidence after evidence that the media is in collusion with the DNC.
And Eric Schmidt of Google was an advisor to Hillary's campaign.
Yeah,
He's the CEO of Google.
Everybody needs to be a lot less naive. We're not talking about a free market. That's not what we have here.
And if we had a strict separation of government and business, I'd say, yeah, absolutely. Anyone do whatever you want.
I think I would too, because you would also have the situation where you wouldn't have somebody like, these alternative platforms start popping up and they get crushed by their own deplatforming.
And remember the debanking too, because now remember the operation.
The ISP deplatforming and the social media, like everything. How PayPal and Stripe control the online credit card taking market. And they can just wipe you out.
Well, and MasterCard too is doing it. MasterCard is debanking gun stores and things like that.
And Islam critics.
Right.
And now they're working with a far leftist, like an SPLC style organization, to come up with a list of inappropriate things that you will be deplatformed on MasterCard with. I can provide that maybe next time more of the details.
Yeah, there's no
like
question which direction this is going.
This is fascist. This is crony capitalism. This isn't capitalism. This isn't free market. So put on your big boy pants, everybody.
Right, exactly. And I think the way to approach this without also sort of like jeopardizing our own values and, handing control, because one way to do this is say government takes control of the internet, and then we have Elizabeth Warren and Macron, deciding what.
Exactly.
We don't want
can't
that.
Have that.
So as and that's the conundrum we're in, right? So I think there's a few things you can do. Number one, the Section 230. I think we need to go after Republicans and say, look, if they're going to act, they can't have it both ways. So if they want the Section 230 immunity, they have to be neutral platforms, and there has to be stricter congressional definition of what neutrality actually means that anyone can understand. In other words, right now, this is a gray area. What is a neutral platform? Well, they're neutral, but they're also allowed to ban violent content or pornography or something like that. And so all these so if you're a leftist and your definition of violent speech is, Paul Joseph Watson, or Crowder or something like that, or Ann Coulter, then can you just ban her because that's what you decide? No, that you're not acting neutrally, and the Congress needs to act. If they're going to act as publishers, then remove the 230 exemption and let them become publishers and subject them to lawsuits. You can't, in other words, you can't have this both ways. And I think the right needs to go after this exemption if they're not going to truly act as neutral, if they're going to continually act in a biased way. How you were talking about their concern about election interference? They are disproportionately banning right-wing politicians from their sites. So now, to the extent that government officials are going to use Facebook and Twitter as forums, Daniel Greenfield made this public forum. There's a area in law called public forum, and I think you referred to it with Ed, Sonny, where, there's a point at which something is a store that's open to the public. And, you can't have a government owner of roads preventing, the conservatives from going to the polls kind of thing. And so there's this whole area of this idea known as the public forum, where once something is made public, in effect, by the government using it or using it as a means of communication or sort of a public square idea, then there are civil rights issues at stake. And certainly the left is willing to use those, as Ed pointed out with the Christian Baker. We should be using that as well. And there's campaign finance violations, right? They come after us, and both sides need to play by campaign finance violations. If Twitter or Facebook is going to ban a Republican from using their service, but they're letting the Democrat in, that's an in-kind contribution. They're effectively donating their platform space and not allowing the other side in. So, once they start deciding which politicians can use their platform and which can't, they're now engaged in campaign finance violations, right? So I think that should be a complete area of concern and legal reprisal.
This just makes me, here's why it makes your skin crawl, though, when you're a conservative, is that, or, when you're somebody on the right, is that feels like, I don't want the baker to have to bake the cake. I don't want people to not be able to associate with who they want to associate with in their own store, which, Facebook is a store. But I think where it gets problematic is that I think Greenfield's example of the guy who buys up the roads around your house and then doesn't let you out on election day, like you can't say that's a free society. So you might say, oh, he gets the right to own the roads and let who he wants walk on them or not drive on them or not drive on them.
Yeah, if you don't like it, just build your own road.
Yeah, build your own road. And meanwhile, you have elections that aren't fair. The guy who wanted to vote didn't even get to the poll because you've got people with money preventing it. So how is that? That's not a free society that you're defending. So I guess what I'm saying is if you let business prevent civil rights like free speech and voting and things like this, then you're not really a free society. You're not promoting a free society. And I think that it has to do with size. It's kind of like immigration. I mean, a couple dozen Muslims, no problem. 1 million, problem.
Right. And I think that...
a few Nazis that march in a square in Skokie once a year and get out their KKK hats, like, big deal. A bunch of Nazis with, a Nazi training camp in every state plotting to overthrow, like, basically Antifa, and now you got a problem,
Right.
So,
it is. It's a matter of scale. It's also a matter of, there are provisions within the law and policy regarding imminent violence and things like that. I mean, that's where you get into the minutia of these legal cases.
We have to remember that fundamentally, forget our laws for a second. Like, fundamentally, our Declaration of Independence is a declaration of how we expect to live, that we're free and that we're allowed to have free speech and defend ourselves and take care of ourselves and live our lives the way we want to live it and be taxed with representation and so on. I mean, that was our big rebellion. So whatever the detail of the law is, like, if it doesn't actually achieve that, it's wrong. So, when you start promoting these giant behemoth companies that are effectively suppressing conservative speech in this country, and in the name of freedom, you're not promoting freedom.
Right.
You're promoting something else. That's not what we have. Business is not a just good no matter what. And we don't have freedom. We don't have capitalism, so forget it. But even if we really had capitalism, there would be a competitor to Facebook that was thriving already. They've had to fight so many battles against censorship themselves in order to just exist that Facebook doesn't have a competitor. That's my view.
And what happens when you start a competitor to Facebook and then PayPal won't process your payments?
Right.
And the bank and MasterCard won't take your payments. And,
right.
I mean...
And you lose your URL, which happened to Gab. What is it? GoDaddy wouldn't renew their URL.
And Greenfield points out that the internet initially was, built on it was built by DARPA, defense agency. And, this is essentially built by the government. I mean, the taxpayers of the United States built the internet.
Yeah, it's kind of like you own all the roads around all the government buildings, and you only let the elite through. Mm-hmm. So that you create an oligarchy of your choosing, or you're working with them, and nobody else is allowed to, let's say you elect your neighbor to government, but he can't get there because you won't let him on your road. Like, is that really freedom? That's not freedom.
No. And the big picture point is that we do not live in a free society. We do not have a strict separation between the government and economics.
We don't, but I'm trying to say, even if we did, and the fat, the rich guy bought up all the public square, he's not allowed to stop you from exercising your civil rights.
Yeah, there's a public forum argument. I mean, there's a
point where that would be actually anti-freedom, and I think we're at that point. And so I'm trying to appeal to the libertarians out there and the people who have a problem with, let's say we did have pure capitalism, and you had this that happened in the Wild West when a guy would own an entire town and basically lord it over everybody.
Right. And that's where, and there were cases about this.
Yeah, there were a lot of cases about that, you can't do that.
And what the courts decided was that even in a case where someone owned the entire town, there was a public square, where you still had constitutional protections.
Right.
Even though you were on someone else's quote unquote property.
Yeah, you're in their park speaking your mind, you still get to speak your mind.
There's an expectation, in other words, of, that the public is going to use a certain thoroughfare, a certain area of this property. You're not sitting in the guy's living room. And so, and again, this is why you have to think tactically and critically about this. You don't just say something stupid like they're private companies or I mean, that's such a stupid, superficial way to look at this problem. It is a complex problem.
But I think fundamentally we have to keep our eye on what actually leads to freedom. And that's their fears. Like, if you use antitrust, then we don't have freedom. Well, we don't have freedom. So,
but that's a fair argument too. At the same time, you don't
I agree, but I think fundamentally you have to always be saying, well, what will lead to freedom, or where do we get more free? It's not just.
It's a tactical argument. You're saying what is most likely.
No, I'm not saying it's tactical. I'm saying it's kind of more moral. It's like, if your position on capitalism leads to people being oppressed by the guy who owns the whole town, that's not actually freedom. You're not actually supporting freedom there. So we're not anarchists where the guy can buy up the town and tell everybody what to do. That's not who we are. We're limited government people in America. So we do say the government needs to step in and protect our rights. And in the case where the scale is so big that they effectively own the town, then there's a problem. And I think that's where we're at. And if you like the analogy of go speak somewhere else on, like let's say you're in that town and you're in the public square and you're speaking and they say, you can't speak here. You have to go out to the outskirts of town on the dusty plain and speak your mind where there aren't any people. Like, well, that doesn't work. How can I agitate for a different mayor way out on the dusty plain where no one's there? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's like freedom is the goal. Freedom has to be your principle, not capitalism per se, right?
Right. You don't just drop the context and say, I like private companies.
Yeah.
And so we need private companies. When the government has essentially fascistic control over, these companies and how they behave, you can't make that argument. It's a totally stupid argument.
Yeah. But at the same time, we do need to be careful that we're not short-sighted and we don't put power into Elizabeth Warren's hands.
Right. And that's what I mean when I say tactical.
Yeah. So then once you decide though, okay, this isn't right. We need to fight it. It's wrong. Even for freedom, even for pure libertarians, they can come to this and say, yeah, you're right. This isn't free. This isn't freedom.
I also think I want to make another quick point too, which is I think there's a tort case here, and I think other people have pursued this, but these companies have terms of service that they're breaching.
They change them every 2 weeks. You can't. It's like renting a house with a fluid contract.
Again, yeah, exactly. It's like signing a lease where within the lease says, oh, by the way, I can do whatever the hell I want at any time, and there's nothing you can do.
Right.
I mean. And then they say, well, I said in the contract I can do whatever I want. There's a point at which a court says this contract is not.
It's not in good faith.
Valid. It's not in good faith. It's not a valid contract. It's unenforceable by the courts. Because if one side can arbitrarily change the rules of a contract, the courts can't uphold it. It's like metaphysically impossible to, and it renders the contract meaningless.
Right.
So and again, this is since it's across state lines, it's probably a federal issue where there needs to be guidelines on how these terms of service.
And they're still out there lying. They're still out there lying. Oh, we're a neutral platform. We don't have any bias. And we know they're not. And so they're still defrauding people every day with their lies.
It's a massive fraud. I think by breaching their terms of service and by, forcing people into these idiotic contracts that are unenforceable, these terms of service, and then, luring customers into their sites and creating business models around, by bringing their customers and content to these platforms and enriching the owners of the platform simultaneously. And then the platform changes the rules arbitrarily. That's a total breach. That's a total breach of contract And so, at least if you're a libertarian-minded person, you have to understand that there's certainly, I think, a tort case here. And, I think the Section 230 immunity, which is government run, where they get government immunity from lawsuits, I think that's a really fruitful area. I think the tort case in the terms of service is a totally legitimate area to go after, to say to these people, you can't have terms of service that allow you to arbitrarily declare someone without any sort of recourse. Because I think we all know that when these people get banned, right, they get a letter. You've been banned. There's no explanation. There's no review process. There's no way there's no recourse under these policies, particularly if you have a business and you're suffering significant financial damage as a result of being deplatformed. You need a method and a means to adjudicate this. And since these companies are sort of ethereal, they don't kind of exist anywhere, it's hard, you can't march down to headquarters and ask to speak to the manager. You have no way to hold these people accountable. And so I think that these are, when you're thinking tactically about how to fight these people, you don't just say they're private companies. You say, number one, what can we do that still preserves and that's consistent with, our long-term goal of freedom, but still shows these people we're not going to go away. We're going to fight them and using every means we can. And at the same time, being cognizant that you don't want to give Elizabeth Warren the internet.
And start your sentence with, they're wrong. Like, well, it's a private company. Stop starting your sentence with, but it's a private company. That's bullshit.
Start, these people are evil, they're wrong, they're immoral, they're trying to authoritarian take over the United States. And okay, maybe there's some argument about what we can do legally, but the first thing you say is these people are wrong. They're bad. So they're out to get me.
Yeah, and I think that's the intellectual battle we're in right now. We have to actually win the moral argument first. And simultaneously, I guess. I'm not suing anybody. It's hard to prove you're being shadow banned. That's very difficult to prove. But
and maybe there needs to be, as part of this whole neutrality issue, if they're going to be granted this immunity, which is so valuable, then maybe there needs to be guidelines to really enforce neutrality, where a user needs to be able to see how their content's being propagated through the network to determine whether they're being shadow banned. Right.
You don't know. It's all in the code. Hey, did you see that Trump put out a thing, or Trump's government put out a thing, where if you feel like you're being discriminated against online, censored,
I did.
that you go let them know? It kind of reminds me of Attack Watch, the Obama thing, where if you see something, say something. And it feels a little bit like that. But at the same time, I think that the government does have a role here in making sure that people's general free speech rights are being upheld on the university campuses and on social media.
And remember, one of the primary functions of government is to uphold contracts and to, settle conflicts, like reasonable conflicts between people. And here we have, I think a massive conflict going on, massive fraud on one side, and a massive dispute that's hard to settle because it's the definition of interstate. It's so global in nature that you almost need a terms of service debate. And, certainly if they're going to, like I said, if they're going to be granted this immunity, I think it's completely fair for us to say we need a Bill of Rights, essentially, that says,
an internet
this is
Bill
the
of
rules,
Rights.
man.
Right.
Or we're eliminating this and you guys are now publishers and everyone go at it. It's all just a big free thing and the government has nothing to do with it.
That would be a mess, wouldn't it? I would hope that the other thing would happen where they would actually flip to neutral to avoid that, Anyway, well, we've got to wrap up here. And, your criticism of me that our show's getting too serious, just add this one to the file of evidence.
Well, we're both too serious. I think the situation is serious. So it's hard to be. It's hard to be funny.
And it's a problem. We're all kind of grappling with it. Anyone on the right is grappling with it. And every day we're seeing more of our colleagues and compatriots getting deplatformed, and it's hard to watch and sit back, and it's hard to make content freely and openly and not knowing what's going to happen. Where do I build my following? I've got 8,000 followers on Facebook. What do I do with that? Do I walk away from that? I don't know what to do. I'm on YouTube. I'm gonna start opening up on BitChute. I'm gonna start posting on Minds. I'm getting rid of my personal profile on Facebook and just gonna manage my page because I just don't even want to go there. I don't want to go there anymore.
We may have to go to the old model where everyone just has a website.
Yeah, right. The blog model.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it worked.
That may be where it's headed.
It worked. And then there would be aggregators and stuff like Drudge and stuff. Anyway, well, thanks for joining us today. Please comment. Let us know what you think. We'd really like to hear from you, our listeners. Let us know what you think about this issue because it is hard. It's really complicated. There are many sides. What do you think about the moral case for this? Do you agree with us? And
where can people comment?
YouTube. That's the main place. Also Facebook, I guess. Facebook professional page, Sunny Lohman. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the House of Sunny podcast. Go check out Sunny on YouTube at her channel, House of Sunny. Everything Sunny does is fan-funded, and because she's likely to get kicked off and demonetized on every platform at some point, please support her over at patreon.com/House of Sunny. Become one of Sunny's elite squad and have access to behind-the-scenes footage, t-shirts, special events, and more.